For nearly 1,000 years, armies reached these walls and failed. Then, a 21-year-old sultan arrived with a weapon built to make stone surrender. The walls were not a legend. They were layers of stone, brick, towers, moat, and accumulated experience, the strongest defensive system in medieval Europe. Avars, Arabs, Rus, Bulgars, and other armies had tested Constantinople. Most discovered the same truth: reaching the city was easier than entering it. But in 1453, the defenders heard a new sound. Each blast from the Ottoman bombards shook the ground before the projectiles struck the wall. It is tempting to say one cannon ended an empire. The real story is more unsettling. The cannon mattered because an entire system arrived with it. To understand why Constantinople finally fell, we need to see the city, the two rulers, and the pressures gathering around one ancient wall. Constantinople stood where Europe meets Asia, controlling the Bosporus and watching ships move between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean world. Founded as an imperial capital under Constantine in 330, it later gained the massive Theodosian land walls that protected its western approach. Water guarded three sides. On land, a moat and multiple defensive lines forced attackers to survive missiles, towers, and counterattacks before reaching the city. Yet the empire behind those walls was no longer the empire that built them. Centuries of war, fragmentation, and lost territory had reduced its power. The Crusader sack of 1204 damaged the city deeply. Byzantine rule returned in 1261, but the treasury, population, and territorial base never fully recovered. By 1453, estimates placed the city's population near 50,000, only a fraction of the great metropolis it had once been. Across the walls stood Mehmed II. He was young, educated, ambitious, and determined to turn Constantinople into the center of an expanding Ottoman state. The city also interrupted Ottoman territory on both sides of the straits and remained a possible doorway for foreign intervention. In 1452, Mehmed built Rumeli Hisari on the European shore of the Bosporus, tightening control over ships approaching from the Black Sea. Inside the city, Constantine XI faced an impossible calculation: defend an enormous perimeter with limited men while waiting for help that might never arrive. Contemporary estimates disagree, but the defending force was small: Byzantines joined by Genoese, Venetians, and other volunteers under several commanders. Among them was Giovanni Giustiniani, an experienced Genoese commander whose men strengthened the most vulnerable section of the land walls. Soldiers were not alone. Sailors, craftsmen, monks, and civilians carried material, watched sectors, fought fires, and repaired damage across the enormous perimeter. Across the entrance to the Golden Horn, the defenders raised a massive chain, denying the Ottoman fleet direct access to the city's sheltered harbor. Then came the artillery. Sources associate a cannon founder called Orban, or Urban, with enormous bombards commissioned for Mehmed's siege. These weapons fired huge stone balls, but their real achievement began before battle. Casting, transporting, feeding, positioning, and protecting them demanded organization. Roads had to be prepared. Teams pulled the largest guns. Powder and stone traveled with them. A weapon this heavy was also a logistics project. The greatest bombards were slow, difficult to aim, and required long cooling and reloading periods. They were terrifying, but they were not magical. Mehmed combined them with smaller artillery, infantry, engineers, miners, ships, supplies, and the ability to continue applying pressure day after day. The formal siege began in early April. Ottoman guns concentrated on sections of the land walls, while defenders worked under fire to contain each breach. During the day, stone collapsed. At night, defenders filled gaps with timber, earth, barrels, and anything capable of becoming another barrier. Below ground, Ottoman miners tried to undermine the defenses. Byzantine counterminers listened, located the tunnels, and fought an invisible war beneath the walls. Outside, Mehmed's camp functioned like a moving city. Soldiers, animals, craftsmen, food, powder, messengers, and command had to remain coordinated. At sea, the Ottoman fleet pressed the approaches. But the chain across the Golden Horn protected the northern side and frustrated a complete blockade. The city still had one fragile advantage. If friendly ships reached it, supplies and hope could cross the water faster than the walls could collapse. On April 20th, a small group of Christian ships fought through the Ottoman fleet and entered the Golden Horn. The defenders celebrated from the walls. For Mehmed, the episode was more than a naval embarrassment. It proved that the city could still breathe through the harbor. His answer became one of the siege's most famous scenes. Ottoman vessels were hauled across a prepared overland route behind Galata into the Golden Horn. The maneuver did not instantly win the siege. It did force the defenders to watch another front and divide men they could barely spare. That distinction matters. Cannons, ships, mines, and assaults were not separate tricks. Together they removed the city's options one by one. Week after week, bombardment damaged the defenses, while Ottoman resources absorbed losses that the smaller garrison could not replace. Inside Constantinople, religious division and memories of 1204 complicated appeals to the Latin West. Some aid arrived, but no army came to lift the siege. The defenders still repaired walls, watched tunnels, guarded the harbor, and prepared for assaults. Survival depended on remaining effective without relief. By late May, Mehmed had to choose. A long siege risked disease, supply problems, declining morale, and the possibility of foreign intervention. On May 28th, both sides prepared. The city held religious services. The Ottoman camp organized for a final, coordinated attack before dawn. The assault came in waves. Irregular troops pressed first, exhausting defenders and testing barriers that had been rebuilt from rubble. Anatolian units followed. Noise, smoke, projectiles, ladders, and repeated attacks prevented the defenders from recovering between each phase. Then Mehmed committed elite janissaries against positions already damaged by artillery and hours of continuous fighting. The defenders still resisted at the breaches. For a time, the old defensive system continued doing exactly what it had been designed to do. But Giustiniani was seriously wounded and withdrew from the fighting. The exact effect is debated, yet contemporary accounts connect it with collapsing morale. With too few reserves, every abandoned position mattered. Ottoman troops entered through breached and contested sections as organized defense began to fracture. Constantine XI died during the final struggle. Later stories describe his last moments differently, and certainty disappears where eyewitness accounts divide. On May 29, 1453, Constantinople was taken. The Byzantine Empire's capital had fallen, although other Byzantine territories survived for several more years. Conquest brought killing, enslavement, looting, and displacement. The human cost should not be hidden behind maps, rulers, and military technology. Hagia Sophia, the city's great imperial church, was converted into an imperial mosque, transforming one of Byzantium's strongest symbols. Mehmed entered not simply as a destroyer. He intended to possess, repopulate, and rebuild the city as the capital of his empire. People from different regions and communities were brought or encouraged to settle. Markets, institutions, palaces, religious sites, and infrastructure were reorganized. Under Ottoman rule, the city recovered population and commercial importance, becoming a political and cultural center of a growing world empire. The conquest ended the Byzantine imperial government in Constantinople. Mistra fell in 1460, and Trebizond followed in 1461. Greek scholars and manuscripts moving west contributed to intellectual life in Italy, but no single migration event created the Renaissance by itself. The conquest also affected diplomacy and trade, yet it did not suddenly seal every eastern route. European exploration had several causes developing over decades. The deepest lesson is not that technology automatically defeats tradition. The walls failed when artillery met logistics, manpower, leadership, timing, and accumulated weakness. Nothing that survives for 1,000 years looks temporary, until the system protecting it loses the ability to recover faster than pressure can damage it. In the next investigation, Finn enters a city destroyed in hours but preserved for centuries. Subscribe to follow the evidence into Pompeii.